Hello everybody and welcome to a new interview from MinnMax. MinnMax is a place about games, friends, and getting better. My name is Ben Hansen. Thank you for being here. This is an interview with Ryan Payton and Matt Walker from Camouflaj. The independent studio is celebrating 10 years of existence, and they also just launched the anniversary edition of Republic, however you want to say it. In this interview, we talk about running an independent studio, fielding off acquisition offers, Matt Walker's history working at Capcom on franchises like Devil May Cry, Monster Hunter, and Ryan Payton's history working at Konami as the associate producer for Metal Gear Solid 4, and then working as the creative director for Halo 4 before leaving that project early and then starting up the independent studio. These guys have a great perspective on game development, especially Japanese game development. And Ryan Payton in particular, we talk about stories of him getting drinks and touring the globe with Fumito Ueda from Shadow of the Colossus and Eco fame, and Miyazaki from Software. So some behind the scenes fun stories of those two talking. It's a wide-ranging conversation. It feels more like a loose podcast than an interview at times, so we hope you enjoy it. We hope you learned a thing or two about the game industry from this interview. And if you enjoy this type of frank, open discussion, we always appreciate it if you would subscribe to MinnMax's YouTube channel, help support independent games media, and you could really help support us and also unlock the podcast version of this interview by going to patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's and supporting us to the $5 tier. You unlock the podcast version of this interview. All of our other interviews, our huge community game clubs called The Deepest Dives, early access to the MinnMax show, our Patreon exclusive podcast Party Chat. There's a lot of benefits, so you can help support us in a big way and help support independent games media by going over to patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. All right, without further ado, here's Ryan and Matt. Matt and Ryan, welcome to MinnMax, guys.
Hello, Ben Hansen. Thanks for having us.
Hello. The full name, Ryan. Very formal of you. Thank you. Thank you.
And also we have to make sure that we get Matt Walker's introduction there. Come on, dude. Come on.
Here we go, Matt Walker.
All right.
There it is. There it is. That's what people are looking
back,
for.
Baby.
What a horrifying voice. Hey, welcome, guys. Are you both in Japan right now?
Yes, sir.
Wow. And Ryan, you're doing this on your vacation, so thanks for making the time, man.
No, thank you for making the time. You know, it's been a while since we've chatted. Camouflaj has not been so much in the news in the last almost 2 years now, since Marvel's Iron Man VR shipped in July of 2020, which feels like forever ago.
Oh my God.
So yeah, we've just been heads down and doing lots of really fun stuff. So we kind of resurfaced a little bit for the release of Republic and Republic VR coming out on March 10th on a couple of platforms I'm sure we're going to talk about. But yeah, it's a great excuse to reconnect with old friends and talk video games, you know?
Yeah. Okay. I would love to unpack so much with you guys. I think you're, hopefully this isn't too much ass-kissing. You have a very interesting perspective on the game industry. So I'm ready to dive into a lot of stuff here. But, okay, the 2 years of kind of silence from Camouflaj, like I listened to every episode of your podcast. I think it's fascinating to like track the history of that studio from that podcast. And then I was so bummed out when it just went silent around Iron Man VR. Was that just Marvel being like, how about you shut your mouths? Or what is the reason for going quiet for 2 years here?
Well, the main reason initially, yes, was comm strategy, Camouflaj radio. I'm very proud of that podcast, but it's not necessarily on brand. It's the whole point of it is to be as open as you possibly can to talk about the good and bad of development.
Right. And
as an avid listener, you would hear us talk about what do we do in these situations where this thing seems like it's the end of the world. And I'd have people come on the show and talk about, it's how hard it is to make a video game. And so, right around the time of the announcement of Iron Man VR, it just wasn't, we had to be so careful about what was going out.
Yeah.
And we didn't want to disrupt anything that Sony was planning from a PR perspective.
Right.
So, we mutually agreed to sunset it for a while. And it was hard because we just loved doing that. And we got such great response for it. But you know what? It was also kind of a fun and nice, problem to have, because it kind of showed us that we were in the big leagues finally. We were working for so many years, kind of a scrappy indie dev, and here we've got this fantastic title, Marvel's Iron Man VR, working as like a first, second party title for Sony and working with Marvel. So, on the one hand, it was kind of a bummer, but on the other hand, it was like, okay, no, this is prime time now. And now let's just focus on making the game and working with our PR and marketing partners and make a big splash,
Yeah. Matt, do you want to revive the podcast at this point? You eager to jump on there?
Oh, that'd be a lot of fun, man. I'd love to do that. And, I think, especially with us releasing these Republic ports here, that's something we could totally do. Don't you think, Ryan?
Well, I don't know. I'm busy enough as it is, and I remember just wondering when I was building those. Well, I was editing the podcast and giving feedback on them before they went live. Ben, I remember thinking every single episode, is this a good use of my time?
Right.
And is this a good use of my studio's time? Like we're so busy and we have so much going on. We want our games to be so good. And at a certain point, I think I started to realize that it was taking away from like the quality of like, I think our output, because I could have been spending this hour long working on the game or reviewing the game or reviewing content or whatever. And those hours add up. So I don't know if we're going to bring it back or not, but I actually truly, I'm humbled by the fact that that you've listened to every episode and it makes me want to go back and do it, right? But yeah, I'm trying to be a smarter game developer as years goes on.
Yeah, I think it was just, how often do you get that level of insight into an indie studio? And I remember like there were so many times we were just trying to read between what everybody was saying to figure out like, okay, these seem like some very dark times in Republic's development here. And I remember you were encouraging people in such a big way to be like, talk about it. Talk about what a bummer it is right now. Talk about how game development kind of sucks in these dark periods. And it just seemed like everyone at times was like, we just want to get back to work. We don't want to talk on this podcast about how much this sucks.
Yeah, it was sort of becoming like a therapy session, really, which was fun. One of the features we have in Republic Anniversary Edition that's coming out on March 10th on Switch, PlayStation 4, and PlayStation VR.
Look at this guy, he's a pro.
It includes 100 of these developer commentary clips that I'm just so proud of the fact that I did this, Ben. I mean, I would sit down in these meetings I would have with the team, and I would record with their permission on my phone the conversations, the meetings about, oh, this thing is not going to hit on time, or the quality of this is not good enough, or this guy wants to do this guy, but this other guy wants to do this other thing, and how do we have conflict resolution? Or Nate Dogg's pissed at me, and what do we do about that? Like, we've got to let him get it out, and we're going to kind of hash it out, all recorded, all chopped up, and kind of sprinkled throughout the game.
That's so cool
for players to hear, not like a retrospective necessarily, although there are some retrospective clips that we added as part of the anniversary, but mainly just you get to hear what it was like working on the game, and you get to hear all the raw human emotions there. And we look really good at times, and I look really terrible at times, and I bet some people listen to it and think, man, Ryan wasn't being entirely fair with those people, but it was all learning moments, and I'm really proud of the fact that we did that.
Yeah, I mean, Matt, you did plenty of... Oh, go ahead, sir.
I love that, you decided to kind of look at a different format for a way to share that information compared to the podcast, because I think, in my experience, what I found is that there's going to be certain audiences that like certain stuff, right? And so I'm a big fan of hearing about how games are made, and I love to hear all those really raw details. But I think a lot of times what we found is that there's a certain audience that's going to like that stuff, and then a really broad audience that kind of doesn't really care. Like, they're just really interested in the content. And the kind of big wake up call for me was, speaking of podcasts, me and Pete Fabiano, who's at Bungie now, we started this podcast at Capcom.
Yeah.
And our goal was, we were thinking there must be all kinds of people that are going to want to hear about what it's like, working at Capcom and in the Japanese game industry, and all these like kind of behind the scenes things. And we did that, and we only got, I don't know what you guys got on the Camouflaj podcast, but we only got like a couple hundred people for every episode that listened to it.
No kidding.
And so, yeah. And so I think really it's just, personally, what I think that means is just that there's certain audiences that they're really into certain kind of things, and certain audiences that, not as much. Well, sorry to interrupt you there.
A counter to this, we're taking over Ben's podcast.
No, I was going to ask about Capcom Confidential. I think it's fascinating. Yeah.
Let's just keep going, Matt Walker. At the height of Kojima Productions podcast, the one that I was hosting, and which I think, it inspired me to do Camouflaj Radio. Mm-hmm. Because that was every other week, I think, or every week. I can't remember now. But at the peak, some of our episodes were starting to get 100,000 downloads per episode.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And then you have that episode.
And that was back in 2007.
Were you able to track the analytics for the episode that was in Metal Gear Solid 4? Could you see how many people listened to it through that game?
That I don't know. In fact, I was, I left maybe 2 or 3 months after I had a long vacation built up because all the overtime I was doing. But yeah, I never saw those numbers. But yeah, when things were rocking and rolling on the Kojima Productions podcast, it was like over 100,000 downloads per episode in a very quick succession. Lifetime, I would assume much higher. But yeah, it was. So that's sad to hear about the Capcom side of things, because like yeah, I find that stuff fascinating. But yeah, it's not for everybody.
Yeah. What story on Capcom Confidential were you most proud to get out there, Matt? Is there an episode that stands out to you, or just a developer who like would never see the light of day before and you're able to surface them?
For me, actually, we did have a lot of great stuff like that. But for me, like the fun thing was just kind of revealing to everybody that Resident Evil Revelations 2 is this game that it kind of started from a different place. It was going to be kind of a different game. And so we knew that. We had worked on it. And it was on that podcast that we went, you know what, we're going to kind of share some information about this and let people know like how that started out. So it was really fun to kind of explain that, especially because I think on that episode that we did that, we were also talking with our friends at House of Moves who helped us out with mocap and scanning the characters for that game, actually. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Where did it start out? What was the original idea?
Well, the original idea ended up being, it was still set in the same place, but we had Nakanishi-san, the director of RE7, was originally working on it, and he had this kind of grand goal of making it something that was going to be a little more online. It was going to be a little more open world, and there was going to be a what I consider kind of a more refined story. We were working with an outside writer named Jeffrey Yohalam, who at the time was, I think he works for Ubisoft now. And Naveed Konsari was directing the cutscenes for us, who, you know from Grand Theft Auto, and now he's got his own studio.
That's fascinating. Yeah, we did the cover story for Revelations 2 back at Game Informer. Yep. And then I got to actually...
So I was coordinating all of the that cover art and stuff that you guys had for that. Yep. Because I was doing all the production on that stuff at that time.
Yeah. Well, good job trying to surface some of the development talent within Capcom and getting those old timers to talk and tell some inside stories and stuff. Because it's just fascinating. Like I got to visit Capcom 3 times while at Game Informer, which is a real honor for like Monster Hunter World and Iceborne and then Mega Man 11, and just like. Nice. The stuff that some of these old timers would throw out there would just like go over PR's head because like I couldn't even anticipate it. Like I remember the director of Mega Man 11, Oda, was that his name? But he was talking to us about just his history in games, and at some point he mentioned like, I worked on the first Resident Evil and I was working on it on the Super Nintendo for a while. It's like, wait, what? Like I had never known that Resident Evil started development on the Super Nintendo. And he's like, oh yeah, that wasn't a mistranslation. Yeah, we were working on the Super Nintendo. It's like it just never would come out. It's just so casual for these people within those halls. But then just if a glimmer of that reaches the outside world, it's like, wait, what? What's actually happening within Capcom? What is this crazy history that everybody just takes for granted within those halls? It's wild. So
I love that you love that, Hanson. And it's funny because when Matt Walker and I are just bumming around Japan and talking about our plans for global expansion for Camouflaj and all the work that we're doing, we do talk about wouldn't it be nice someday in the future where we can just kind of take a pause from moment to moment video game development and I don't know, just do a huge effort to get all this really invaluable information and history of games out of Japan into English, out just out there for more people to just be able to consume and have readily available. Because you're right, there's just so much good stuff in there that all these games and these franchises that we love and respect, that it's not like it's a deep secret. It's just you got to ask people.
Right.
In fact, I in one of the mini trips I had back to Japan when I was working on on our canceled Battle Royale game before Battle Royale took off. That was a sad chapter in Camouflaj history. Right. But a happy like a part of that chapter was I found an excuse to meet up with the director of Panzer Dragoon Orta for the original Xbox.
Oh, interesting.
Mukayama-san, and he worked on Panzer Dragoon Saga, and he told me these amazing stories. That's on our podcast. In fact, you probably heard it. That was about the fact that just the insight in terms of the pressure that team at Sega was when they're working on that seminal RPG for Sega Saturn, Panzer Dragoon Saga, and how it was meant to be a huge competitor to Final Fantasy VII, which they knew was in development over at Square Enix, and the pressure that the team was under, but they had a fraction of the budget, a fraction of the staff. And just like how, and I had no idea that game was positioned as Sega's response to Final Fantasy VII. And he had such great insight that I just keep thinking, I want more resources like this, and we just need more help getting that information out to people.
Yeah, if you could just like partner with 8-4 or something, and then everybody could just take a year off and just travel Japan, get all these stories, just release a book, or just either of you release a book with some of your stories, just somehow get that stuff out there.
We got to do something. We'll do something someday.
Okay. We will. Speaking of Final Fantasy, I was reading the stories about your expansion with a new studio out in Japan and all that stuff. And then you brought on Alexander O. Smith, who has a big history with translating. I mean, going back to Final Fantasy VIII, is that as far back as it went?
That's right. I mean, he goes as far back as, well, I guess, I mean, his big breakout was Vagrant Story, which I think came out before Final Fantasy VII, if I'm correct.
I don't think so.
Oh no, am I wrong?
I think so. That. Yeah, I think that's later.
Right. That's a later Square Enix PS1 joint. But yeah, that was the one that really put him on the map. But,
right.
Yeah, we're very honored to have Alexander O. Smith join Camouflaj full time as a writer. He didn't make a big deal about this, but he still does localization, translation, but he really translated or refocused his efforts towards game writing in recent years, and it was at Moon Studios, and he helped ship Ori 2 or Ori and the Will of the Wisps.
Yeah.
And then he joined Camouflaj after shipping that game. So yeah, Matt Walker and I work with him every day. It's awesome just to be able to bring in such great talent because, we're not a scrappy indie anymore over at Camouflaj. We're at 80 people full time.
Really?
We're pushing 100 if you include contract and all the other outside partners that we have. And we're trying to be big time now, Ben Hans. We're not messing around.
Trying to be big time. Matt, how did you get roped into this whole thing? What were those discussions like?
Man, well, it actually all started, let's see here. It was a year and maybe a year and a couple months ago. And Ryan Payton just happened to be in Japan. And again, Pete Fabiano, he's like, oh, Ryan Payton's around. So I said, great, I'd love to join you guys for lunch. And we started talking. And at that point I had been kind of considering, where am I going to go next? I've been at Capcom for 10 years now. Do I stick around? Does it make sense for me to try something new? Where can I learn and grow more? And Ryan Payton and I hit it off. Over the course of, I'd say 48 hours or so, he was in Osaka. Me and Pete hung out with Ryan like 3 or 4 times. Like we had lunch together and then we hung out like in the evening for, dinner and drinks and stuff.
This is such a crass way of putting it, but it was like, I don't know, like when you're young and you're like, you find somebody you're really into. Yeah. And you're like, want to spend every minute with them. And it's like, okay. And this literally happened. We would have lunch and we're like, what are you guys doing? They're like, we have to go back for a meeting. I'm like, what are you guys doing after that meeting? It's like, yeah, do you guys, can we get coffee in the afternoon too? I'm like, yeah, we'll get. So we would meet up after him and Pete had a meeting, and then we would have coffee, and then they have to go back to go to work because they're gainfully employed at Capcom. And what are you doing for dinner? And then we do a long dinner. What are you doing? You guys want to do breakfast? We're just like having such a great time catching up. We're also in the throes of the pandemic and haven't been able to see many friends, and very few visitors coming in Japan. So it might not have been my personality or anything. It might have just been the fact that I'm just like a fresh face that they haven't seen for a while. And we just talked and just had a great time and talked about the future. What do we want to do? What do we love about games? And we found that Matt Walker and I had a ton of really exciting alignment. I've been a fan of his. The work that he's done on Devil May Cry 5, I thought was stellar. And I asked him if he'd be willing to come over to Camouflaj and help me build the studio into a premier game studio. And yeah, thankfully he agreed, and the rest is history.
Yeah, I mean, you two must have bonded a lot over. I mean, you going to Konami back in the day, Ryan, must have felt pretty similar to Matt, your role within Capcom, and kind of being, in some ways, okay, I'm the English representative for this amazing development team. What can I get away with? How can I communicate? That sounds like a lot of pressure. So I'd imagine there's a lot of bonding over that idea, right?
Oh man, absolutely. Well, I mean, and you figure I moved to Japan in 2007. And at that point in time, like my first exposure to Ryan Payton and really like hearing about Westerners in the game industry was the Kojima Productions podcast. Yeah. And so I would go take a run around like the castle in Odawara. And as I'm doing that, I'm listening to this podcast. I'm like, wow, this guy's amazing. Like, this is what I aspire to. I've just moved to Japan. I want to work in the game industry. I want to be like him. And it took me about 3 years, but eventually I get into Capcom, and yeah, I end up getting to kind of follow a path where I'm getting into production and eventually become a producer on a whole series, right, on the Devil May Cry series. And he was always somebody that I looked up to, So to hit it off with him so well, and then to eventually get an offer to like come work with him, I was like, oh my god, this is a dream. This is fantastic.
So you all released a documentary on the history of Republic. By the way, I'm sorry. I know this is the most cliche stuff, but you've jumped back and forth, Ryan Payton. So I don't know what to say anymore. Republic. What is the term of the day?
It's whatever you want to say. I jump back and forth too, Ben.
Yeah.
I should be consistent. I'll bring in my brand manager next time to help set the record straight. But it's whatever you want to call it. Yeah, okay. Republic.
Okay. Well, anyway, so this Area 5 documentary is about the history of that game's development and how rocky it was and difficult, and it's that weight and guilt of like, okay, it was crowdfunded. We have to go through with this. So it's bizarre to see that trajectory for the studio, and then Iron Man VR, and then silence, and now you're bursting out, making it seem like we're cock of the walk. We have billions of dollars. Let's expand. What's happened? Is there some crazy source of funding that I'm not aware of, or what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, from a financial perspective, Camouflaj was always on the razor's edge,
right.
For the first probably 8 or 9 years. I lost count after the first 9 times. I would have a moment where I wasn't sure how we were going to survive. I didn't know how I was going to hit payroll, and that happened 9 times over the course of the first 8 years or so. Not good for my health. Not good for the studio. Not good in general. But we were just so fiercely independent, and we were so dedicated to wrapping up Republic with all the 5 episodes and putting on every single platform under the sun, and just moving along. We go quiet for a number of years, right? We go quiet for 3 or 4 years, and then we emerge with Marvel's Iron Man VR. It's this big title with Sony and Marvel, and I think that took people by surprise, because What they don't know is that between those 2 projects, we spent years working on a game with Shinra as a subsidiary of Square Enix, which was a battle royale game that I had pitched in 2014. So we're talking 2 or 3 years before PUBG.
And was it based on you playing Arma or anything?
No, it was way before the Arma mod too.
Okay. Oh wow. Okay.
So I had this thought. I was like, nobody's going to believe me, but I remember I was on a train. I was on my way to Square Enix. I was going to pitch to Wada-san. He wanted to hear a pitch for a game for their new cloud streaming, multiplayer-focused initiative. And I remember thinking, that movie called that Battle Royale movie, that Japanese film? That would make for a great video game, like the premise of it. Now, I'll change the fiction and everything, but just the premise of everybody, I don't have to explain what Battle Royale is, but the whole premise of it is fascinating. There should be a video game like that. Yeah. And it'd be perfect for streaming and everything. And I wrote up the pitch on my phone. My staff put it together as a deck. Later that day, I pitched it, got the funding, and we started working on it. And it was canceled. It wasn't canceled by them. We worked with a different partner once Shinra was sunsetted. It went to another publisher, and they canceled it probably 4 or 5 months before Battle Royale took off. And I assume that they've regretted that ever since. But I oftentimes think, what would my life have been like had we shipped that game? And we probably wouldn't have been working on Iron Man. We probably would be still working on that game and doing updates to it. And that'd be fun too. But it's it's kind of like how life works. There's these big moments, and your life changes in trajectory. And I know I'm not answering your question about our financials. So let's wrap this up though. Iron Man VR. We're happy with how it did. Yeah. And we're working with some more partners right now. We've got a main game that we're focused on, and then we've got Republic coming out just around the time of this podcast or in the show coming out. But we've got our main title right now that we've got the team on, and it's got a healthy budget, and we're doing another VR game, and we're just so happy to be getting another shot at doing VR because we're really proud of what we've done with Iron Man VR, but we know we still got a lot of room to grow. Gotcha. Can you say which VR platforms? Can't say what VR platform, but we're loving it. That's all I can say. All right, whatever it is, you enjoy it. So why the expansion to Japan? Well, one thing that's always bothered me there's a lot of things that bother me about game development, and I think that could be better. And one of them is that I remember thinking back when I was working on Metal Gear Solid 4, is that I would get in the office around 7 in the morning. Some people, around 10, but they would stay till about midnight or so. But we're talking about between 10 to 15 hours of the day that's being worked on the game. But you have a set amount of time to build the game. You only have 3 years typically, right? And so when the guys are racing home for the last train and they go home to their families and they go get some rest, and then there's like a good 8 to 10 hours where nobody's working on the game. It would bother me because I'm thinking, we have a fixed amount of time. Obviously, we don't want people crunching 24 hours. How can we do this better? Now, Ubisoft figured this out and it applies like a global approach to development. And many other studios are doing that right now. So we're not the first to have this idea. But my thinking is that, especially with how remote work has become much more of the norm due to COVID, is there a way for Camouflaj to get a kind of a competitive edge, to increase our capacity for production and efficiency by encouraging our staff to, if they want to move outside of the increasingly expensive downtown Seattle Bellevue area, and they want to go move to closer to their family or where they grew up or out of the country, they can do that. And I actually realized one day, wait a second, I could do that too. And in fact, this is actually really good for development because the Seattle team, which is where most of our staff still lives and works out of, is they'll work on the build. It'll be done by the end of their day. By the time I'm kind of getting up in the morning, and I've got the day for Matt Walker and I to run through the build with Alex O'Smith. We give our feedback, and then we have some staff. We have staff in London who reviews that feedback. We've got engineering team in New York that's fixing bugs that we found in our day. And by the time Seattle wakes up, they've got feedback. Some of the bugs have already fixed, and they can get started for their day. So we still got a lot of efficiency to do, but this is part of like a more global approach to how we can just be better video game makers. Because at the end of the day, that's what I just want for Camouflaj, to be a great game developer. Yeah.
Are you all in Osaka then, or where are you at?
We're actually in a town called Kamakura. Have you ever been there, Ben?
Oh, yeah. That's like, is it the old capital? Something like that?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, good history.
Thank you.
So we're in Kamakura. It's about 45 minutes south along the coast from Tokyo, and we kind of converge there. It's a beautiful town. There's actually another game studio there that we kind of share like office space with, and it's been just an absolute blast to be able to do that. And it's really easy to convince people to come down to Kamakura for a meeting because it's such a beautiful place.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I always I forget if it was on a podcast somewhere, I'm sure it was, but I remember like the greatest vision of your life I ever had, Ryan, was at some point you said that your life was walking to work to go work on Metal Gear Solid 4 while listening to Mars Volta. And I was like, that is the coolest life I've ever heard. It's just possible. So do you think there's a certain amount of nostalgia for you of like, I'd like to go back to Japan, kind of go back to my early 20s in a way?
Wow, that's so funny. I don't remember saying that, but it's true. I mean, that's when I peaked, by the way. Let's just be clear.
Of course, yeah.
I was 26 years old, listening to Mars Volta, spending most of my disposable income that I was getting. I wasn't making that much money at Konami, but I spent the majority of it on rent for a 250 square foot apartment.
What?
That was just a block away from Konami, which was one of the most expensive plots of land in the world. I don't know if it's still that way. It's called Tokyo Midtown.
Okay.
It's a very fancy office, but because I didn't want to waste any time with commuting and I just wanted to work on the game, it was 5-minute, 10-minute walk, enough for maybe one Mars Volta song to get into the office. And but I would also, it's funny, my memories of it also just in some of the free time I did have, I was listening to One Up Yours, and listening to Mark McDonald and Shane Benhausen and Garnet Lee and all those guys like argue and debate, and just feeling really lucky to be working on a game that people care about and are people are willing to debate about, and people just say ridiculous things about how Metal Gear is PlayStation forever and will never be on any other platforms, and all that fun like kind of console war stuff you remember from like the mid to late 2000s.
Right.
And it was just exciting to be part of that. And to loop it back to what Camouflaj is about, we went very indie in the sense that very inexperienced team, very small, working out of a abandoned bank building for the first 2 years, and that was an opportunity for me to actually learn how video games are made. The truth of the matter is that when I worked at Konami, I was a good kind of mini director. I found I had a talent for that at a young age. And then that led to me becoming the creative director on Halo 4 at a very young age, at 27 years old. And then when I started to realize that I wasn't as good as I thought I was, it's because I didn't know how video games were really made. I'm just there riding on the coattails of these talented teams. You know, Bungie had made all those games up until that point, right? This Metal Gear team made all these games up to that point. I wasn't there on the ground floor figuring out how these games are going to function. And so then to start my own studio with Republic, with a pretty young and inexperienced team, I realized that was my crash course on how a video game is actually made, and really increased actually my respect for the teams that I had the honor to be able to work with up until that point.
If you woke up tomorrow and you were back in that era of being the creative director for Halo 4 again, how different would you be? What would just change in your like demeanor? Because I think the way you've talked about it before is you're maybe a little bit too much of harnessing that. I want to be a visionary. I want to get some lessons from Ueda into this Halo 4 game. Is the lesson just to kind of go with the flow a little bit more? Or in retrospect, what do you think about that period?
I love this question. I think about it all the time. I'll first start off by saying that I was at Microsoft 343, and then the studio, which become known as 343. I was maybe the 12th team member or so when that started. And then by the time I left, there was about 250 people. It was just rapid expansion for that studio, right? And when I was demoted about 2 years in, I remember going home and telling my wife and just crying on my bed, just crying. It was really hard. It hurt my ego and just my whole self-worth. Totally. Because I'm a workaholic, still am in a lot of ways. And to be kind of told officially that you're not as good as you think you are is hard, but especially when that's all you have. Right. Or at least that's all you think you have. It's one thing if you had good balance in your life, and then like one of those things isn't working out so well. You know, you got balance, right? I didn't have balance. And so I oftentimes think, what would I do now if that now that I'm a lot older, and a little bit wiser. I think it was a mistake for me at the time to try to revolutionize first-person shooters with Halo 4. Yeah. With a team that had never shipped a game together. Most of the team had never shipped a Halo game. And we also had to grow the team from 12 people to 200 people. And in doing all of that, what I think would have been the better move would have been for us to remake Halo 1. I know that team would eventually actually ask Saber to do that for the anniversary edition of Halo 1. But I think that would have been the smart move. Looking back is like, we learn. It's kind of like what I'm talking about, where I had to go through the process of learning how to make a video game with Republic, right? But I think it would have been great for us team to really learn the ins and outs of how Halo functions by kind of doing like a proper, almost like a Blue Point style remake on it. Yeah, or like it's what the Coalition did. Beautiful, because Halo 4 is beautiful, right? Yeah, yeah. And I don't want to take anything away from the team too, because after I was demoted and eventually kind of asked to leave. That was such a hard project, and those guys shipped a great game. Now, it wasn't nearly the level of ambition that I was pushing for. Someday, I'll probably be able to talk about my vision for Halo 4, but it's probably closer to what you got to experience with Halo Infinite or Halo Infinity than Halo 4. Well,
I'm curious. I'm curious if I may take the job of Ben Hansen for a second here and ask you a question. I'm wondering, you get it, so you get over there and you're trying to direct Halo. I'm wondering, did you come up against any differences in work culture? You figure in Japan, from what I see, I think a lot of times we kind of have this charismatic director in Japan who, and there's a culture here where generally people are going to kind of follow the head honcho, right, and kind of do what the head honcho wants, right? Did you end up having any problems there? Could part of this be that you kind of had the expectation that things were going to go that way when you were working in the West, and that ended up not happening, or is that completely unrelated to what happened there?
I remember, early on, just thinking, oh, wow, people push back a lot more in the States. They're a lot more open with their opinions about things they like and they don't like. And I wasn't used to seeing that at Kojima Productions. Like, there were some outspoken people, don't get me wrong, but Hideo was the boss. Right. He's a director. He's a very strong director, right? And for the most part, we would follow Now he had a few people in his inner circle that were willing to push back, but they had to be smart about the way that they pushed back. And that was actually one of the few things I was good at, is that I was able to build trust with him and say, hey, I don't think this boss it's not really that fun, don't you think? And he's like, yeah, you're right. But I had to like build that rapport with him. And it's like only like a handful of people that could work with him in that way. And I was really lucky to have that. So then as I become the director, right, for Halo and come to the States, I'm like, whoa, I thought this was a great idea, but like this guy's like saying he doesn't like it. And what do I do about it? And how do I get people to buy into my ideas? And it became a crash course in influence. And it's changed the way I work since then. So the way that we do things at Camouflaj is that I guess technically I do have the final say, but I can count on one hand how many times I've used that my executive power over the last few years. It's really it's more of a culture of getting buy-in. If you can't like convince a reasonable person on the other side of the table that what you think is a great idea for the game is a great idea, then it probably isn't a great idea. And I'm not going to leverage the fact that I'm the boss to get it through, because I think that's probably not the best approach. Yeah.
Are you counting down the days on an NDA to expire or something with Microsoft, or when do you think you would tell the story of what you wanted to do with Halo 4?
Oh, I mean, no, I don't. I mean, I have such a great relationship with those team members now. It was, strained for a little bit, mainly because of my own embarrassment. But I was able to reconnect with a lot of those folks, and we've got a great rapport, and I still connect with Phil really fairly frequently. So it's really less about that. It's more about just out of respect for them. I want them to be able to focus on their content and their future, and not have to worry about, what is one of these former creative directors going to say?
Sure.
That, and for what it's worth, all my stuff would be very positive, and if anything, if there was anything negative, it would be mostly just negative towards myself. But again, I think just I wouldn't want. Let's just put it this way. If somebody had left during Marvel's Iron Man VR and then does a interview years later and says, well, this game was actually going to be like this different. And I don't know if it really help out the current team who's working so hard on, whatever we're doing next. Right.
Yeah, I get it. Did you play Halo Infinite? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I did. It was somewhat emotional for me to play that, because some of the ideas, that I remember we were getting excited about and we were building towards for Halo 4. I saw some of those in the game, and it was I didn't know, I wasn't expecting that. So, and I felt a lot of pride when I played the game for the team. Now, a lot of people I worked with aren't there anymore, but 343 as an entity still is, led by Bonnie Ross and Frank still there. A lot of David Berger, a lot of talented folks are still there. And I have to imagine it's really hard to get to that point. Halo 5, I don't think was received as well as they wanted it to be. And for them for this game to had gone through what it did publicly with that first reveal, and how hard that must have been for the team, and then for them to swing back to like where it seems like the world is just rooting for them. Yeah. And loving the game and just celebrating what that team did. I just felt like a weird sense of pride, even though I haven't worked there for over 10 years, right?
Yeah, it's a weird case. We have this game club format called The Deepest Dive. So we talked about Halo Infinite for hours and hours and hours. And one of the things that's interesting is like, is it just a weird example of the internet losing its mind in a negative way, resulting in a positive outcome? Like, I guess you can point to the Sonic movie redesign or something, but like everybody reacting in such a strong way to that first big gameplay demo for Halo Infinite, then probably resulted in them delaying the game for a year. Right? And then it came out so positive in the end. It's just weird that, it turns out just bashing the visuals of a game paid off. I hate to say it's a good thing for the internet to get pissed every once in a while, but this is a weird example.
Well, yeah. And I thought the same thing, Ben. It's one of the reasons why I love my job. I love looking at the industry and trying to learn from it and understand the trends. And it is one of those instances where the other one I could think of is maybe like No Man's Sky. There's other games like this as well,
sure,
in which negative response. But when you can tell that the devs care and they're working hard and they're addressing the concerns that people brought up. Not everybody on the internet is a sociopath. There's like empathetic people that are willing to see people work hard and take your feedback and want something to be better. And then and a lot of people want to root for them. And I think a lot of people were rooting for that for 343, and it was awesome to see.
Yeah. Hey, Matt, you have a really interesting perspective just on Japanese game development, working in Capcom for so long. And I'm curious, like, what you think about the current state of Japanese game development, game developers over there. Like, you were at Capcom in the bizarre period of Operation Raccoon City, Lost Planet 3, just, you know, a lot of DMC, which turned out well. I like the game a lot from Ninja Theory, right? But just like contract out with Western devs. And now it feels like within the last, you know, it's almost a old discussion at this point, the last 10 years, there's been a really wild revival. Last 7 years, it seems like, of Japanese games just knocking it out of the park. Where do you think the overall development scene is at in Japan these days?
Baby, look at Elden Ring, man. Elden Ring just came out.
Yeah, what else do you need to know?
Right? Yeah. Oh, man, it's amazing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that you brought up Operation Raccoon City. That was the first game I ever worked on, was Operation Raccoon City.
That's
and that was a joint venture between Capcom internal dev team and dev team at Slant 6 in Vancouver. Since then, unfortunately, Slant 6 Games isn't around, and everybody's kind of gone on to do different stuff. But you're right, and that was all, you think about it, right? That was all very much a response to seeing for the first time since like the in the mid 80s, when consoles really started to become a thing in America, for instance, and certainly in Japan. We didn't, in the mid 2000s, all of a sudden we kind of have all these Western studios that are figuring out, and they're doing all this amazing stuff, and in a lot of ways doing stuff that Japan can't do. You know, Japan, no matter how hard you try, if you grow up in a culture that is separate from, like, you know, a certain audience, you're not going to be able to create, say, the same kind of stories. You know, in Japan, if you look at Japanese cinema, for instance, the stories that are told here, the cinema that's made here is very different from what we have in the States. And, you know, there's certainly good and bad to both, I think. But what you're going to end up finding is that, you know, in America, for instance, we're used to this kind of story. You know, these kind of things resonate with us. And, you know, that stuff kind of gets lost in translation, which is the fact that people grow up with different stuff in Japan. And I think in the mid 2000s, Japan was kind of reacting to that, going, oh, no, like we can't seem to figure out what it is that, you know, we need to do to first catch up with that, but then also catch up to, you know, like eventually physically based rendering, those kind of like graphical techniques and stuff. And all of a sudden having to do what we can to create assets that are going to be hopefully made more procedurally, so we're not spending hours and hours and all these person hours and time on creating all these really beautiful assets that we need to in order to keep the bar high for AAA games, right? So that's what was going on back then. Since then, I think Japan's finally caught up on the technical front for sure, and we have this great situation where the DNA of Japanese games, you know, the fact that they very are kind of gameplay focused, has helped bring us to this age where they're certainly doing their best to try and have that same kind of story and focus on kind of world that we do in the West typically, but then also bring in all the DNA and all of the know-how that they have for making great gameplay, like bosses, for instance, right? I think Japan's always been fantastic at doing bosses. And in the West, I think it's harder for us to do boss fights because
that is weird.
Right. I think we tend to put more focus on like the kind of the story and the world at large. I was listening to a podcast recently, this Kiwi Talks podcast, where they were talking to some people that made Metroid Prime, for instance, and they mentioned this. They said, yeah, look, what we see is that in the West, we do tend to go, all right, what's the story behind this character? That's where we start from. Whereas in Japan, it's, okay, what's the gameplay for this character, right? And I love to see where Japan's at right now. The fact that Elden Ring is the biggest thing right now is I love to see it, you know. I will be curious to see. I have a personal opinion that I think that a lot of people that review games these days, we want to root for Japan. You know,
it feels nostalgic.
We grew up with Japanese.
Totally.
Right. And so maybe I'm wrong, but I do wonder if sometimes Japanese games might get kind of a pass on certain things that Western games would get a little more beat up for, just because we want to see Japan succeed. I know I want to. That's, you know, why I live here, right?
Yeah, it's weird thinking about like the boss fight thing, but you're right. Without any spoilers here, Ryan, like if you pluck any boss fight out of Elden Ring and throw it in any other game, well, that's the greatest boss fight in the game. And the fact that there's like hundreds of these things in Elden Ring is just mind-boggling what that team pulled off.
Yeah, they're absolute masters. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, Ryan. Look, you don't have to tell all the secrets and stuff, but I have heard that you had an experience that I think most people on Earth, or maybe just geeks like me, would pay thousands for. You went out and got drinks with Ueda and Miyazaki. Can you shed any light onto what that was like from your perspective to see those two minds meet?
Well, not only did this has happened, not to make you jealous, but this has happened on numerous occasions.
Jesus Christ.
And, one of the most guilt-ridden business trips I ever took was for the Reboot conference in Croatia. And it's guilt-ridden because it was like a week away from work and my team, but just so fun to be hanging out with Fumito Ueda and Hidetaka Miyazaki. Yu Suzuki made a surprise appearance. Swery was there. It was so fun. Demir, who puts on that event, you know, it's one of one of many sad things about COVID is that, you know, events like this aren't happening and you know, starting to come back, right? But that was I think in 2019, and also just hanging around and just walking around like castles in Croatia with Miyazaki-san.
Oh my God!
You know, who's studied these things very closely, and he was working on Elden Ring at the time. And you know, we're talking a little bit about Game of Thrones and stuff. And the Game of Thrones was filmed at one of those castles in Croatia, so we were talking about those different scenes. It was an experience of a lifetime, really. The connection between those two gentlemen is actually that Miyazaki-san has an extreme deep respect for Fumito Ueda. Counts Ico as one of the games that convinced him to be a game developer.
Yeah,
it was extremely influential for him, and so it's a dynamic that's really fun to see. Is just two creators have like a lot of respect for each other, and I'm just there, like wondering why am I even here? These guys like don't need me, but you know, I love helping out developers, and I think I don't know if this has ever been talked about formally, but I represented Fumito Ueda during his negotiations to get his next game signed. And I was a big part of that whole deal with him getting his game signed by Epic.
Yeah.
And that was a multi-year thing that we did together. And I'm really honored to be able to work with him on that level and that capacity. So yeah, he's a close friend of mine, and I look at myself as being really lucky to be able to rub shoulders with these industry legends. Yeah, absolutely.
Is Ueda a fan of Dark Souls and the Soulsborne series?
I think he's a fan. He also finds them, like a lot of people, extremely difficult.
Sure.
And but he's making his way through Elden Ring right now.
That's awesome. And this is just.
But I don't want to know where he is because no spoilers.
No spoilers, of course. Yeah, I mean, this is just from like the interviewing a couple times perspective. But Miyazaki has just struck me when you meet him, like, oh, he's just like a fantasy nerd. With all due respect, he's just a very smart fantasy dork. That's what's going on here. Do you have a takeaway or just a surprising reaction after getting to know Miyazaki a little bit on those trips?
I spent a good amount of time with him, not just on those trips, but just visiting a studio.
Okay.
Just talking about certain things. He's helped me on some things. And every single time I meet him, I'm just stricken by something. And it's funny enough, when Mark McDonald got to meet him during the development of Bloodborne, he had the same thought, is that this guy is hyper smart.
Yeah.
Just you meet those people in your life, you're like, oh, this guy's really smart.
Like a Matt Walker type.
Miyazaki, it's not surprising. Yeah, Matt Walker, right. Definitely. I was like, this guy's... No, but him and Peter are also really, really, really talented game developers. But when I've met with Miyazaki over the years, it made more sense to me how a designer on Armored Core 4 Answer, which by the way is one of the greatest or worst video game titles you could ever come up with, could become the CEO of the company.
Yeah.
And direct these unbelievable titles hit after hit, oftentimes working on them simultaneously, it takes a very special type of person. And he's emerged as a leader in the games industry in Japan, not by his own like personal PR either. He's not one to like try to, grab the limelight. He doesn't put his name over, on a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with that, but he could probably be way bigger if he wanted to be, right? And he's one of those rare developers, I think, in Japan that is kind of like part of this like more this new wave of console directors. Whereas, like, I think you have a lot of the current console directors who are the same console directors from a decade ago and 20 years ago, right? I mean, Nagoshi-san's still, clipping along, Ueda-san, Kojima-san, Sakurai-san, right? But he's actually a fairly new talent if you really look at it. Nobody knew about him 8 years ago. Yeah,
that's a weird way of looking at it for sure. Have you ever get scared of how consuming his work must be in his life to be that great? It seems like, with the years, I'd imagine you're getting better and more aware about work-life balance. And it seems like Miyazaki is kind of all in on letting himself be consumed by this. And do you think at a certain point that's what it takes to be at that level?
It's hard for me to tell like how many hours he's rocking.
Yeah.
Although I did meet him one day where I could tell he was working probably throughout the night.
Yeah.
And I felt bad for him.
Yes, Matt?
I wondered the same thing though, Ben. One of the reasons that I enjoyed Ryan Payton was because I was really looking forward to kind of learning from him and kind of seeing what it takes to be like kind of as driven, as successful as he is, And I wondered the exact same thing. Like, is there something where these people that really do great stuff, are they just consumed by work, or are they just constantly like outputting and spending energy all the time? I mean, even just think about some of the biggest CEOs in the world, like Tim Cook, right?
Yeah.
Like all you hear about Tim Cook is he gets up at like 6 a.m. and he starts like looking at emails and stuff, and he's like doing that while he's like on his bike, his stationary bike and stuff like that, right? And these people, I feel like, God, they must never turn off. And I'll be honest, I think Ryan Payton's kind of like that too. And so I wouldn't be surprised if it turns out that like some of these greats like Miyazaki are kind of like you, Ryan Payton, kind of like they're just constantly doing stuff. They're constantly outputting stuff,
Yeah, well, the one thing that Miyazaki-san has going for him, and it's one of the things I've learned over the years, Ben, about how you can become great is, and we're not there yet. I'm not there yet. Camouflaj is not there yet, but we're well on our way towards this, is to be really smart about building upon your successes. And that's, I think, one of the key strengths of From Software, for example, and a lot of these other great franchises out there, great teams out there. Even if you transition to a different IP, let's just take like Halo to Destiny. Obviously, the team at Bungie built off of their successes of Halo, and they didn't go off and do something completely different. Same with the From Software games. There's a lot of core identity design systems. They're just building and they're making it better and they're making it better and they're refining, and they're not just reinventing the wheel and doing something completely different. And that was one of the things that I've always wanted to do at Camouflaj over the first 10 years, but we couldn't do it because Republic wasn't successful enough. And so we had to transition to a multiplayer battle royale game with 100 players. Are you kidding me? We don't know how to do that.
Right.
And of course we struggled, but it was cool. Don't get me wrong. And then we transitioned to VR, and we're doing Iron Man VR. So now with our next title, now that it's also in VR, we're able to leverage a lot of our learnings, and the team is like being able to develop those muscles, and we're able to refine, and we can see the fruits of that labor and just how great it is to be able to kind of work within that same space. And so, yeah, that to me is, again, I don't know how many hours Miyazaki-san pulls. I know Ueda-san's a hard worker. A lot of these guys are really hard workers, but I think that they also benefit from the fact that they don't have to work with the team about like, okay, so what is this game actually like? Let's prototype like the core moment to moment and then have to build from there. That is, doing that and shipping a great game in like 3 years is extremely difficult and very, very rarely works out well.
Yeah. So you're saying your next VR game will be the equivalent of Elden Ring, I think, for your experience, just learning from everything.
Well, no, what I'm saying is like, if we're lucky, the next VR game will be the equivalent of Dark Souls. Like,
of course.
Like,
okay, going back,
VR
of
was
course.
like our Demon Souls.
There we go. All right.
We've still got a long way to get to our Elden Ring.
By the way, Matt, please forgive me if this is too much deep cuts with Ryan Payton. You're welcome to cut this off at any moment, please. But okay, the trying to sign Ueda's next game. That is a fascinating experience. I cannot imagine what that's like, but if I had to imagine it, it would involve walking into any publisher and saying, do you know who this is? And then they just give them a dump truck of money. Why wasn't that happening?
In some regards, it was happening. Look, he's a incredible talent, one of the most respected and talented game developers in the industry, in my opinion. And a lot of people share that opinion. So, when you call up a place and say, hey, you're interested in looking at what Fumito Ueda is thinking about doing next, everybody wants to talk,
of course,
obviously. And they're interested, and they want to work with him, and they want to help him, and they want him to help him be great. And that also in turn help them, whether they're a platform or they're a publisher. And so there was no shortage of interest. It was really ultimately came down to everybody, at least what I find in this side of the business, the biz dev business, they've got certain things that are really important to them, and they're different per person and per team. Some people only care about the money. Some people only care about control. Some people only care about owning stuff like the IP, so there's some people not only care about, but some people really care about the ancillaries, like the merchandise, like this George Lucas approach. Right. So, but you can't do, unless, there's maybe a handful of people could actually pull this off, but normally you can't show up and say you want it all. And so my philosophy when it comes to kind of pairing a team that's looking for typically at the end of the day, looking for project financing, right? And then you're looking at a partner that's willing to provide it. You try to identify the best partnership where there's the most alignment. And turned out after a year plus of meetings and talking to different places and me trying to do that while work, we found that the partnership with Epic was where there was the most alignment. And Ueda-san feels respected and empowered to do what he needs to do. Because the Epic guys have just been absolutely incredible partners, and then he's helping them, build their whole game publishing empire, which just started with Alan Wake remaster, and so really excited about what they're doing too. So it was hard, but at the end of the day, I think it ended up absolutely perfect. Okay,
obviously, I'm very curious to see what that game is going to be. And I think they said in the last statement, like, we're going to try and reveal something by the end of the year. It's like, okay, that seems good enough. I guess, Matt, joining the indie world, you can jump in here too, but what do you think about the state of indies at this point? We're to the level of Camouflaj is one of the last standing. I know that's not literally true, but it's just bizarre to look at the world and be like, who's left? Remedy is the last huge one. There's probably others, but I don't know. What do you two think just about consolidation in the industry these days?
Oh man, it's something, isn't it? And just today, I opened up my RSS feed and saw that Netflix had purchased Finnish developer, I believe the one that worked on their Stranger Things game.
Oh, really?
And so, there's so much acquisition going on right now, right? I see it as I am thankful that there's so much interest in games, that that gives these companies an opportunity to try and basically consolidate, I guess. And dude, it's hard. It's hard to run an indie studio. And you look at Ryan Payton again, who over the course of 8 to 9 years, he was living hand to mouth, right? Just trying to keep the studio running, trying to keep his people paid, and I'm sure there were times where it was like, oh God, are we going to have a situation where we might not get paid this month because whatever, the build that we sent wasn't up to somebody's standards? Might not even necessarily be the company's fault. There could be, certain people involved there. And that's scary, man. So I think it's difficult because on the one hand, there is this kind of image of big bad companies kind of come in and they kind of knock out the creativity, and they kind of end up, I don't know, taking away the personality from these devs and the product that comes out. But I think we're in this nice space right now where the companies that are doing it, like look at Microsoft, man. Microsoft I get the impression anyways that maybe they did that, like over 10, 15 years ago, right? They came in and they were like, oh, you should do this, you should do that. But just kind of like talking to people in the industry, I get the impression that Microsoft's learned from their mistakes. And they go,
seems that way.
Look, the way that we're, from what I can tell, right? From what I can tell from just like talking to random people, that it seems like they understand that like the important thing is that these developers have the room to do what they want to and need to make a good product. Because in the end, for all these platforms, that's the most important thing, is that good product. The reason that Nintendo's still around, the reason that Nintendo didn't go the way of Sega and, go into third party is because they've always prioritized that good product above all else. And I think that, like I said, I feel like I see Microsoft doing that. I wouldn't be surprised if I don't know a whole lot about Sony. I wouldn't be surprised if Sony does though, or if they're also very good about going like, okay, look, second party, first party studios, you guys do your thing because we trust that, you're going to do another Last of Us, that you're going to do another Ghost of Tsushima,
Yeah, I mean,
and we just got to let them do it.
Even with like, the Bungie acquisition, the fact that in the official messaging for that announcement, it was that Bungie is going to remain an independent studio within Sony. It's like, who even knows what that means at this point? But I think Gearbox also phrased it that way with the Embracer acquisition. It's like, what is this? Ryan, how many offers have you had for Camouflaj? How many people have actually said, let's do this?
Yeah, like there's a lot of industry consolidation. As you said, we're one of the last remaining kind of mid-sized independent game studios. So you have to imagine that, I wake up and I get there's a LinkedIn message or somebody directly emailing me and saying, hey, you're interested in talking to us. So yeah, it's something that it's just, I look at it as like the kind of the sign of the times right now. With all the consolidation. And I've had some good conversations where we're not like actively, like, hey, somebody, there are studios out there saying like, hey, we're selling, like, let's talk, right? We're not in that mode. We're really focused on the game that we're making. But yeah, some of the conversations have been pretty wild too. Like I remember one call I took, it was, hey, so you're one of the last remaining mid-sized game developers. So we'd like to talk to you about acquisition. I didn't say this because it would have been really, but I remember thinking like, you're like the last girl that hasn't been asked to the dance.
Jesus.
Like, and I remember thinking like, yeah, you really know how to make a girl feel special. So, so there are those kinds of things out there, which is not aligned with our values. But here's the other thing. Another thing about me that I've ramped down as of late to focus my efforts on game development is that I'm still somewhat involved in two funds that some of your audience members, I'm sure, have heard of. One of them is called Kowloon Knights, which is a project financing fund that their most popular game is just doing unbelievably well right now, which is Sifu. That was funded by Kowloon Knights.
Awesome.
And I was one of the founding partners in that, and I continue to support them on as much as I can. And then also Makers Fund, which is an equity focused fund. This is the other side of the industry that most people that I kind of talk with that don't get as much exposure with, like maybe you're kind of more your enthusiast media doesn't talk about a lot, is that yes, there's a lot of consolidation going on, but there's also a ton of people leaving larger companies to start smaller companies.
Totally.
Who are talk with VCs or do fundraising. Sometimes they fund it on their own. And there's lots of smaller companies right now that are building stuff that nobody knows about because they just started or 2 years ago, right? And that content is starting to come. And so it might feel like this is the end of the line and like it's going to become, how do I say, like a dystopian future where there's only like 3 companies left making everything. And sure, maybe that's where we're headed. But in the short term, though, I see a lot of consolidation of long-standing studios that, maybe are just tired of the rat race, quite frankly. But you've got all this fresh blood and fresh talent that is on the horizon, and that's exciting to see. Yeah,
the kind of explosion of creativity, like Matt, you leaving a big publisher like Capcom, just finally embracing the indie world in a big way, like that. It works both ways for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that do that. Look at Counterplay; they came out of nowhere and they shipped. I should know that it was a launch title for PlayStation 5.
God.
Oh,
Godfall?
Yeah, Godfall. Like,
Okay.
that was originally, they seeked funding for that, and now they're a force to be reckoned with. So yeah, there's a lot of examples like that if you just look, but it's not like they're not as recognizable right now as as a Remedy, as you mentioned.
Right.
What's gonna happen with Platinum? Are they gonna sell? You know, could Kojima Productions ever be part of a larger organization?
Well, that is something that I think somebody wrote into the MinnMax Show podcast about this, and we're stupid. We don't have the answer for it. But somebody asked, why aren't people buying Japanese studios? What's going on there? Is there any insight on your part for why it's not as common?
It's hard. That's the first way to answer that.
All right.
You've like, for example, for companies, and correct me if you think I'm wrong on this, Matt Walker, but you take a company like Capcom or Konami, it's very much like family owned. And so it's different than maybe some other companies out there that were started for the purpose of being a company to maybe eventually get acquired over time. It's I think it's less attractive for them to, if a big company comes up and says, hey, do you want to be part of this organization? They're thinking, but this is kind of like our legacy here. And I think that they also have had incredible success, especially on the Capcom side, I think over the last 10 years. So I don't see what would they really get out of it at the end of the day?
Money, Ryan, I think is what it is. A heap of help and money.
Like if it's family owned, I'm assuming that, I don't know how much these guys are worth, right? But I'm assuming that they're doing okay, right? And it's but maybe they're not. But that's another thing. That's what I've noticed, and I don't want to say name names, but I think a lot of these studio owners in Japan, it's not just about the money.
Huh.
I think that's important.
Whereas Western studios, it's like, well, it's a little bit about the money. A little bit more about the money.
I don't want to make generalizations,
of
but
course.
I think like for Bobby Kotick,
right.
Yeah, I mean, I think money is a big part of it. Big part
I would imagine so. Yeah.
But there's other people that have different values. Where, like, for example, money was probably motivated Bungie, to sell to Sony, obviously, right? But they fought tooth and nail. Clearly, if you can see in the announcement that they cared about their independence too. They have their values a little bit different. So it's all fascinating. It's all working with people, which is always fascinating, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when people are talking about who's left, what's the next big acquisition that can happen, Capcom is definitely up there. Square is one that, you hear rumors about forever. Matt, within the next 5 years, percentage chance that Capcom's purchased?
Good question. Personally, I don't see Capcom getting purchased. It's like Ryan said. I mean, the people, literally, Kenzo Tsujimoto, the guy that started Capcom, the guy that started Irem, got ousted from Irem and took Capcom and made that, what it is today. He's still the head of that company, right? And then he's also started a winery, a vineyard and winery in addition to that. But he's done articles in Japanese here recently, within the last year, where there was an interview with him and his two sons that work at Capcom. One is essentially the kind of the CEO under him. And then the other one is Ryozo Tsujimoto, the head of Monster Hunter, right? The head of R&D too. This guy, Ryozo, I think, really has his shit together. I hope I can swear.
You're fine.
Really good guy. Really cares about developers. And Kenzo has said in this interview, like, yeah, look, I want to keep it in the family. Why? Because I know that I can trust that these are people. These family members are people that are going to make sure that we're always doing what's best for the company. So that's on the surface, that's what you hear about that. I'd be curious to find out who would be interested in buying like a Capcom, because Capcom is kind of, in my opinion, one of the last Japanese developers that can actually really put out good AAA content, right? There's all kinds of Japanese developers that do amazing mobile games, right? And other kinds of experiences too. But AAA console content, I think you have your Square Enix. I think you have Capcom, which is part of Kadokawa.
Kadokawa.
Yeah.
Right? And those are the big ones, right? Sega, I think
they've got their perks. Yeah.
Right. They got their ups and downs, I think. And I think what you really see, though, is you're seeing more talent from these companies kind of being picked off by usually other Japanese companies, sometimes Chinese companies, both Tencent and NetEase have been, we're doing a lot in the Japanese space here, because I would imagine that they see that, especially in China, that you're going to have, again, it goes back to the culture thing. You're going to see content that resonates with Chinese people from Japan, potentially more than, Japan to the West, for instance. I'd be curious. I'd be curious to see who would be interested in buying like a Capcom or something.
That's an interesting point, by the way, Matt Walker. I've looked at data. It's fascinating how Chinese players are way more open to playing games from other territories than any other territory.
Huh. Wait, just meaning like Americans want to play American games or Japanese people want to play Japanese games, but Chinese players are like, we'll take whatever.
Like that. It's like, American players, I think, are open to playing a Japanese game. They're open to playing, Western or an Eastern developed, or like a Eastern Europe developed game like Cyberpunk and stuff like that. So there's definitely diversity in content. But the breakdown I saw, granted, this was about 2 years ago, it was fascinating. It was just, if it's a good game, I don't care where it's from. Whereas in Japan, there's definitely that thing, right? It's like either I play Japanese games and don't really branch out too much. But yeah, it was fascinating to see just like the Chinese, your kind of typical Chinese player on Steam, just absolutely fascinated and interested in so many different types of games, and from doesn't really matter the country, and they have a big thirst for Japanese content as well. So I think Devil May Cry did quite well in Japan, in China, I would assume. I think that Dark Souls does really well there as well. So yeah, it's fascinating the way that the game industry continues to evolve over time. Yeah,
we just interviewed Joseph Ferris not too long ago, and he said that, God, I don't want to get this wrong. I think he said somehow, he didn't understand it, but that 50% of the players of It Takes Two were in China. Like,
it doesn't surprise me.
That is mind-boggling. It Takes Two of all games? Or maybe it's just confusing, but somehow it works.
Yeah, unbelievable.
There's such a large audience. There's so many people who play games in China, And of course, that China is a really it's difficult in the sense that, yes, there are all these people that play these games. Certainly, there are certain platforms that they're going to prefer, right? People are going to have a lot more access to cell phones and PCs in China. On the flip side, if you're going to do it the right way, if you're gonna do it with the blessing of a Chinese government, there are a lot of hoops you have to jump through in order to get that game. You're gonna have to censor the game in certain ways to make sure that it's content that the Chinese government's okay with. And so just getting games out there is a challenge sometimes, right? But there's kind of a black market in a way. I don't know what it's like right now, but yeah, I can tell you, for Devil May Cry, we had so many people playing and enjoying the game in China, and that was actually one of those things where technically that is not something where I think it wasn't approved by the Chinese government. So somehow there's a lot of players that are finding ways to kind of get around that, use Steam or whatever to play these games.
Real quick on that Devil May Cry 5 thing, those live action cutscenes that y'all included in there, just like recreating those. That was one of my favorite things from the industry the last 10 years. That was so bizarre. Dude. What compelled them to do this?
So Capcom's been doing that. We've been doing that since maybe Devil May Cry 3, maybe even before that. But and when you make a cutscene, there's a certain kind of process that you go through. And for Capcom, what we would do is there's something that we would do called blocking. You call it blocking in the West, actually. It's usually you just have like, okay, here's where the camera is, and here's where the character is going to be. From an angle perspective, does this work? What's actually in the scene? That's what blocking is. Well, at Capcom, at least since Devil May Cry 3, what they've done is they actually do these little shows like this. It's where to do the blocking, they actually like take a live camera and they have the director who says, okay, this is what the shot's going to be. And people kind of dress up and stuff. So we have stuff from all the RE games. We have stuff from the Devil May Cry games. And the Devil May Cry stuff, you'll see it. Like, I'm pretty sure that there's been snippets of that in like making ofs for Devil May Cry 4, for instance, as well. And for Devil May Cry 3, it's just that like those making ofs are so old now that who knows if they exist on the internet, especially the Devil May Cry 3 one, right? And so Capcom has had these for years. And I remember back when we were making RA6, the director, Sasaki-san, he was showing me RE6, And I said to him, like, look, dude, you should include these in the game because they're so much fun and people would get a kick out of them. And at the time he was considering it. And I think for Ari that didn't end up happening. But for Devil May Cry here, Itano-san loves to do stuff, loves fan service, absolutely loves fan service. There's so much in Devil May Cry that you can point at and go, oh yeah, this is because the fans love this thing or because they wanted us to do this thing.
Right.
That he was like, look, we got to include these in there. And we thought it was the greatest thing.
It's fantastic. Is it a relief to, leave Capcom? You never have to field questions about Dragon's Dogma 2 again. There's just got to be so many just like fan requests that you're like, not my problem anymore. See you, folks.
Oh man, I love that people do reach out and ask that kind of stuff. And actually I feel bad because I think over the last year or so, I've been a lot worse about like replying to people. But I've always seen it as, look, I really appreciate that you care about our stuff, So I never felt like, oh God, I don't want to deal with this or anything. Although I did end up, not replying to people nearly as often as time went on. Dude, I can't wait to see what Capcom's got in the pipeline, man. It's going to be, you figure with all the success that we had first with Monster Hunter, first with RE7 and the Monster Hunter World and Cry, like they've just been on a roll, man.
Yeah. You notice you're still saying we a lot, Matt.
Yeah.
You gotta let it go, man.
We're going to talk about that. We will have to talk about that.
Okay, this is a weird one for you, Ryan. Real quick, we're wrapping up here. Sometimes I just like take notes like, oh, I'm probably going to interview this person at some point, so I'll just take a quick note on my phone if something pops out to me. And so I searched Ryan Payton in my phone, and I had a note to ask you this next time I talk to you. And I don't know where this came from or what, but I had a note that apparently with Metal Gear Solid 4, there was a push to hire big name actors in the early phase of the project. Do you remember this? Do you have any insight into just trying to court Hollywood talent and then it didn't really happen for some reason?
Yeah, I do. Do remember that. It was one of my earlier jobs on the project. It didn't go very well. And I probably shouldn't name the actors. But
you could, though.
Let's just say, I guess I could. Technically, I guess I could, but I shouldn't. And let's just say it was, at the time, they were confused and didn't know the franchise. And I don't think understood like what kind of an opportunity it could have been. I think had that been 10 years later, I think they would have probably thought a little bit differently about it.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, because like at the time, Metal Gear Solid 3, which by the way is my favorite video game of all time,
good choice,
was an important game in the games industry, but it was still fairly insular. It wasn't like this mainstream hit. Now, MGS4 was like, I really feel like where that franchise really started to become massive because of the trailers and the excitement about PlayStation 3 and just how amazing it looked. And it had more mass appeal than Metal Gear Solid 3 in a lot of ways. And so that game hadn't come out yet, where I think a lot of those kind of the big name Hollywood talent would think made a greater effort to have conversation. But yeah, it didn't go well. Was it
for for like the beasts or more kind of ancillary characters, or was it like, let's replace Snake for Metal Gear Solid 4?
Yeah. Hey, do this. Set a calendar reminder on your phone for like 10 years from now.
Okay.
And maybe I'll be able to talk about that. Yeah, I still have some good Metal Gear stories that I'm holding off on.
You've been teasing this for so long. It's been every interview.
Hey, just put me in, Coach. Let's have an MGS4 retrospective. I'll be able to reveal stuff that now I probably wasn't able to do back in the day. There's still stuff I have to hold close to the chest, but I mean, on that subject, this is a weird segue, but I just want somebody to do a remake or re-release of MGS4 onto modern platforms. Bring it to PC, bring it to PlayStation 5, Xbox Series S and X. Somebody's got to do it. I know it's not easy these days with everything, with Konami and everything, but man, if there was ever an MGS4 re-release, whatever, what a great excuse would it be for me and other folks to get together and just kind of talk openly, as long as Konami was cool with it, to kind of share these stories, because it was a special development time, special team, special project. Do you have any insight into why that hasn't happened? Like, I remember talking to Ken at some point, the producer on that game, and I remember him talking about specifically like the flashback sequence in Shadow Moses, like how difficult that was
technically to get running. They need to like bring in PlayStation help. Is it just that the code for that game is so PS3 specific that it would just be a lot to untangle? Or do you have any insight into why it hasn't been ported?
I think the main reason is because I don't think that Metal Gear is a high priority focus for Konami at the moment. And I think where there's a will, there's a way. And I mean, you take a talented shop like a Blue Point, for example, and there's many other studios out there that I think it could do it, right? You put enough smart people on that, you can get MGS4 onto PC and onto a modern platform. You can do it. I think it's more about whether there's a willingness to do it, and then who would Konami trust to do that work. And there's all the kind of weird awkwardness right now with like the franchise with Hideo, not there anymore. It is to be fair, it is a very technically complicated code base, and was not easy to work within. And it made all the sense in the world for me to see when the team decided to move away from that technology and to move into Fox Engine and spend all the time that they did to develop that engine, because MGS4 was like on the surface, beautiful, cutting edge, state of the art. Underneath the hood, not so much.
Just a complete disaster.
Very difficult to work with that technology. I mean, the fact that the game would have had to ship on, what was it, dual layer Blu-ray? Because we couldn't get. I mean, I think MGS5 has a smaller asset footprint than MGS4.
That's so bizarre to think about. That's so weird. What is it? Just is the popular wisdom correct that Konami's just more interested in pachinko machines than they are games at this point? That's just what everybody says. But you all have a nice perspective on this. What is the reason in your mind that Konami's not focusing on games in a big way, or at least letting some other teams touch these games?
I don't know. I'm, as you could probably tell, I'm still in tune with a lot of interesting stuff with the industry. Yeah, I'm really lucky to be able to, spend quality time with all these creators that I love and respect, of these games that you play and respect too, right? But on the subject of Konami, I don't have like a lot of friends who are still there, right? Like either they left and did other stuff, or they went along with Hideo to Kojima Productions. Yeah. And so I just don't really hear too much about the day-to-day over there. From the outside, it looks like they still, do some work with like Castlevania and reviving some of their old franchises. They do like cool deals with like limited run games, and I love to see that. Right. But I don't see so much on the Metal Gear side. So, and I can only just kind of surmise like why that is. It's something that I would love to see in the future for them to utilize that franchise. It's such an amazing franchise. It feels like it's really dormant right now. That being said, the fact that that film is coming out, I have to imagine that there's folks over at Konami thinking, oh, like when the film comes out, what can we have to supplement that? Right. But that's all pure speculation, right? But
I'm still skeptical about that movie. I feel like it's just the director screaming about it. It's like, hey, whenever Sony wants to put in the pipeline, it'll happen. But like, who the hell knows? I guess now that Uncharted's blown up the theaters, maybe everything will change. But who knows?
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, Camouflaj will continue to grow, and at some point, then with your connections, maybe you could knock on Konami's door, try and get some of that IP out there. Would you ever want to work on a Metal Gear title?
Well, I would love. I mean, look, we're too busy right now. But if we could do the work, or if I could help them find studios to bring, especially those really great Metal Gear titles that are still confined to their release platforms. Like Matt Walker and I were talking about one day. We're saying somebody's got to make like a Metal Gear portable collection where they have Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops, Acid 1 and 2.
Oh God, Acid
Plus. And maybe throw in their Peace Walker in there, although that's been released on other platforms. But just the games that haven't been.
Right. Ghost Babel, throw it in there,
Ghost Babel, let's throw that sucker in there. The Shinto Nojiri's like gem from many years ago. Yeah. Got a 10 out of 10 in EGM.
Jesus, really?
It did. It was at one point on GameRankings.com. It was the highest rated video game of all time.
You know what?
I remember that.
I haven't played through it. Maybe I need to go back and give it its due at some point here.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Good game.
We're talking about Metal Gear Ghost Babel. It's probably time to wrap this sucker up. Ryan, congratulations on all the success so far. Where should folks go if they want to celebrate all things Camouflaj at this point?
Well, where they should go is to the Nintendo eShop or the PlayStation Store on their PlayStation 4 and purchase the Republic Anniversary Collection, which is coming out March 10th. At launch price, I think it's like $10 a pop. So we're just doing a big celebration here for the first 10 years of Camouflaj. And we decided to bring this game out that we love so much onto Switch, onto PlayStation 4, and onto PlayStation VR. And Matt Walker helped get that product out the door. It was a long time coming. And we're just really proud of it. That we had a development team called SkyMap who worked on it. And, it's just like part of our legacy as a studio. It's got those development commentaries that we started about talking about like awesome. An hour and a half earlier in our conversation. Yeah. Seems like forever ago. We're really just, if you guys want to support the studio and to see what we're all about, it's a great way to, it's a great place to start.
Awesome. Matt, congratulations on the new gig, man.
Thanks a lot, buddy. I'm having a lot of fun.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing what you guys are going to do in the future. Keep us in the loop, all that fun stuff. And yeah, I mean, I've never talked to Alexandro Smith. At some point, I think it'd be fun to do a standalone interview with him. So if you could get a good in for me, I'd appreciate it, because I'd love to unpack his brain a little bit.
I honestly think that would be totally worth your time. Your audience would love it too.
Yeah.
He's got so many amazing stories. He's got so many amazing stories, Ben Hansen, that Matt Walker and I like purposely try not to go to lunch with him some days that we know we're busy, because we're just going to sit there and go like, wait, you talked, what happened there on that project? And like, and right. How did that thing come about? He's just a wealth of information, really, really generous and kind individual, and super talented. We're very lucky to have him. And speaking of super talented, congratulations for you, Ben Hansen, on your independent endeavor.
Yeah,
I'm a big fan of MinnMax and what you guys do. I just want to say that one thing I really appreciate what you guys do is you don't shy away from the imperfections of the game industry.
Sure.
But you also don't dwell on them. And I think that sometimes in the industry, we sometimes we're really hard on ourselves. I think the fans are really hard on us. So I think we're really hard on. But there's also a lot of reason to celebrate.
Right.
And I love that the balance that you guys bring.
Oh, thanks.
It's one reason why I do check you guys out.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
If I could add to that, I mean, just obviously I've been lucky enough that I've been able to work with and meet all kinds of really great people in the game industry, including lots of media people. And I got to tell you, I feel like maybe I've said this before, but I just for everybody to know, there are just certain people in the media who were genuine and just good people. And Ben, you're one of them. You and the Game Informer guys.
Very sweet. Thank you.
I always loved getting a chance to hang out with you guys whenever we happen to go to TGS or something like that and just talk, because it's just wonderful talk, and you were great people. And the other people were US Gamer, Kat and Mike at US Gamer, where US Gamer unfortunately isn't around anymore, I don't think, but they were just like you guys.
You know what it is?
Just good people that were just wonderful to be around.
I think the secret, it might be a Minnesota thing. Kat Bailey's from Minnesota. Tim, who I know you worked with at Capcom a little bit, he was a Minnesota guy. There's something nice up here, I guess. But you guys are too kind. Thank you so much. And hey, thank you so much for watching or listening to this interview. We appreciate it. There's a lot more like it. If you enjoyed this one, check out that playlist. Subscribe to YouTube channel if you want to see more in the future. All right, Ryan, Matt, thank you so much for your time, folks.
Thanks, guys.
Cool. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
If you are sick of snark, clickbait, and an avalanche of movie news, you can help support independent games media by subscribing to MinnMax's YouTube channel here or checking out the benefits over on Patreon. It's a nice, clean handshake. You support us, and we won't make dumb, condescending stuff for you. Your support helps us continue our mission of focusing on games, friends, and getting better. Patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. We'd appreciate it.